The American Yawp, Chapter 6, The American Revolution. Section 6, The Consequences of the American Revolution. Like the earlier distinction between origins and causes, the Revolution also had short and long-term consequences. Perhaps the most important immediate consequence of declaring independence was the creation of state constitutions in 1776 and 1777. The Revolution also unleashed powerful political, social, and economic forces that would transform the new nation's politics and society, including increased participation in politics and governance, the legal institutionalization of religious toleration, and the growth and diffusion of the population, particularly westward. The Revolution affected Native Americans by opening up Western settlement and creating governments hostile to their territorial claims. Even more broadly, the Revolution ended the mercantilist economy, opening new opportunities in trade and manufacturing. The new states drafted written constitutions, which, at the time, was an important innovation from the traditionally unwritten British Constitution. These new state constitutions were based on the idea of quote, popular sovereignty, that is, that the power and authority of the government derived from the people. Most created weak governors and strong legislatures with more regular elections and moderately increased the size of the electorate. A number of states followed the example of Virginia and included a declaration or Bill of Rights in their constitution designed to protect the rights of individuals and circumscribe the prerogative of the government. Pennsylvania's first state constitution was the most radical and democratic. They created a unicameral legislature and an executive council, but no genuine executive. All free men could vote, including those who did not own property. Massachusetts's constitution, passed in 1780, was less democratic in structure, but underwent a more popular process of ratification. In the fall of 1779, each town sent delegates, 312 in all, to a constitutional convention in Cambridge. Town meetings debated the Constitution draft and offered suggestions. Anticipating the later federal Constitution, Massachusetts established a three-branch government based on checks and balances between the branches. Independence came in 1776, and so did an unprecedented period of constitution-making and state-building. The Continental Congress ratified the Articles of Confederation in 1781. The Articles allowed each state one vote in the Continental Congress. But the Articles are perhaps most notable for what they did not allow. Congress was given no power to levy or collect taxes, regulate foreign or interstate commerce, or establish a federal judiciary. These shortcomings rendered the post-war Congress weak and largely ineffectual. Political and social life changed drastically after independence. Political participation grew as more people gained the right to vote, leading to greater importance being placed on representation within government. In addition, more common citizens, or new men, played increasingly important roles in local and state governance. Hierarchy within the states underwent significant changes. Society became less deferential and more egalitarian, less aristocratic and more meritocratic. The Revolution's most important long-term economic consequence was the end of mercantilism. The British Empire had imposed various restrictions on the colonial economies, including limiting trade, settlement, and manufacturing. The Revolution opened new markets and new trade relationships. The Americans' victory also opened the Western territories for invasion and settlement, which created new domestic markets. Americans began to create their own manufactures, no longer content to rely on those in Britain. Despite these important changes, the American Revolution had its limits. Following their unprecedented expansion into political affairs during the Imperial Resistance, women also served the patriot cause during the war. However, the Revolution did not result in civic equality for women. Instead, during the immediate post-war period, women became incorporated into the polity to some degree as, quote, Republican mothers. Republican societies required virtuous citizens, and it became mothers' responsibility to raise and educate future citizens. This opened opportunities for women regarding education, but they still remained largely on the peripheries of the new American polity. Approximately 60,000 Loyalists ended up leaving America because of the Revolution. Loyalists came from all ranks of American society, and many lived the rest of their lives in exile from their homeland. A clause in the Treaty of Paris was supposed to protect their property and require the Americans to compensate Loyalists who had lost property during the war because of their allegiance. The Americans, however, reneged on this promise, and throughout the 1780s, states continued seizing property held by Loyalists. Some colonists went to England, where they were strangers and outsiders in what they had thought of as their mother country. Many more, however, settled on the peripheries of the British Empire throughout the world, especially Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Quebec. The Loyalists had come out on the losing side of a revolution, and many lost everything they had and were forced to create new lives far from the land of their birth. In 1783, thousands of formerly enslaved Loyalists fled with the British Army. They hoped that the British government would uphold the promise of freedom and help them establish new homes elsewhere in the empire. The Treaty of Paris, which ended the war, demanded that British troops leave formerly enslaved people behind, but the British military commanders upheld earlier promises and evacuated thousands of freed people, transporting them to Canada, the Caribbean, or Great Britain. They would eventually play a role in settling Nova Scotia, and through the subsequent efforts of David George, a black loyalist and Baptist preacher, some settled in Sierra Leone in Africa. Black Loyalists, however, continued to face social and economic marginalization, including restrictions on land ownership within the British Empire. The fight for liberty led some Americans to manumit their enslaved laborers, and most of the new northern states soon passed gradual emancipation laws. Some manumissions also occurred in the Upper South, but in the Lower South, some enslavers revoked their offers of freedom for service, and other freed people were forced back into bondage. The Revolution's rhetoric of equality created a quote, revolutionary generation of enslaved people and free black Americans that would eventually encourage the anti-slavery movement. Slave revolts began to incorporate claims for freedom based on revolutionary ideals. In the long term, the Revolution failed to reconcile slavery with these new egalitarian Republican societies, a tension that eventually boiled over in the 1830s and 1840s and effectively tore the nation in two in the 1850s and 1860s. Native Americans, too, participated in and were affected by the Revolution. Many Native American groups, such as the Shawnee, Creek, Cherokee, and Iroquois, had sided with the British. They had hoped for a British victory that would continue to restrain the land-hungry colonial settlers from moving west beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Unfortunately, the Americans' victory and Native Americans' support for the British created a pretense for justifying rapid and often brutal expansion into the Western territories. Native American peoples would continue to be displaced and pushed farther west throughout the 19th century. Ultimately, American independence marked the beginning of the end of what had remained of Native American independence. Section 7. Conclusion. The American Revolution freed colonists from British rule and offered the first blow in what historians have called the Age of Democratic Revolutions. The American Revolution was a global event. Revolutions followed in France, then Haiti, and then South America. The American Revolution, meanwhile, wrought significant changes to the British Empire. Many British historians even use the Revolution as a dividing point between a First British Empire and a Second British Empire. At home, however, the Revolution created a new nation-state, the United States of America. By September 1783, independence had been won. What the new nation would look like, however, was still very much up for grabs. In the 1780s, Americans would shape and then reshape that nation-state, first with the Articles of Confederation, ratified in 1781, and then with the Constitution in 1787 and 1788. Historians have long argued over the causes and character of the American Revolution. Was the Revolution caused by British imperial policy or by internal tensions within the colonies? Were colonists primarily motivated by constitutional principles, ideals of equality, or economic self-interest? Was the revolution radical or conservative? But such questions are hardly limited to historians. From Abraham Lincoln's use of the Declaration of Independence in the Gettysburg Address to 21st century Tea Party members wearing knee breeches, the revolution has remained at the center of American political culture. Indeed, how one understands the revolution often dictates how one defines what it means to be American. The revolution was not won by a few founding fathers. Men and women of all ranks contributed to the colony's most improbable victory, from the commoners who protested the Stamp Act to the women who helped organize boycotts against the Townsend duties, from the men, black and white, who fought in the army to the women who contributed to its support. The revolution, however, did not aim to end all social and civic inequalities in the new nation, and, in the case of Native Americans, it created new inequalities. But over time, the Revolution's rhetoric of equality, as encapsulated in the Declaration of Independence, helped highlight some of those inequalities and became a shared aspiration for future social and political movements, including, among others, the abolitionist and women's rights movements of the 19th century, the suffragist and civil rights movements of the 20th century, and the gay rights movement of the 21st century.